Thanks so much, Tracy, and good morning, everyone. Good morning? Good morning. Yeah, thanks. It's my pleasure and my honor as well to introduce Dr. Cassandra Volpe Horii, who, as you know, is the president of the POD Network. Cassandra has a background as a physicist, and as I asked her just a couple of minutes ago, what's a nice girl like you doing in physics? And she said, I've left, so we're good. She earned a BA, so this is also one with a sense of humor, which is very important at this hour of the morning. She's earned a BA in physics at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and then took up her PhD work at Harvard with a focus on atmospheric chemistry and biosphere-atmosphere exchange. As she did indicate, she's left some of that work, at least, in her efforts to take up teaching and learning initiatives. And she's worked at several institutions, among them at Curry College in Milton, Massachusetts, which is outside Boston, where she was the dean of the faculty and the founding director of the Faculty Center for Professional Development and Curricular Innovation. She also was the associate director of the Bach Center for Teaching and Learning at Harvard. And in addition, she's taught courses across a range of contexts, including atmospheric and environmental science for majors and non-majors, environmental chemistry for undergraduate and graduate students, first-year composition, freshman seminar, and science, technology, engineering, and mathematics pedagogy. Currently, she's directing Caltech's Center for Teaching and Learning and Outreach in Pasadena, California. As we know, Dr. Horii is president of the POD Network in higher education, which, as I think most of us know, is a national professional organization dedicating to advancing the research and practice of educational development in higher education. It was founded in 1976, and it has a membership of over 1,000. It's well known in the United States for being a terrific support mechanism for people who work with faculty, and also for being a very, very friendly organization, welcoming all comers. And in her talk today, Dr. Horii will help us explore some of the similarities between professional development, about which she knows so much, and e-portfolios as well. Please join me in giving Dr. Horii a warm, able welcome.
What a kind, wonderful introduction. Let me just get the other set of slides up. Starting in the middle somewhere, okay. Here we go. Preview, coming attractions. All right, where'd the clicker go? Here we go. Hi everyone, how are you doing? All right, great. So, in From the Margins Towards Systemic Change, Lessons from the Field of Educational Development. Instead of giving you an outline, oops, I just did the wrong thing, I just want to start by kind of unpacking the title, and that will be, in essence, our plan for the next little bit of time together. I also put up here, whoops, oh, look what that does. Did you know that did that? Wow. Okay, so I put some contact information and, of course, the hashtag up. I'm sure all of us at AAEEBL would love to see your notes and ideas and thoughts on Twitter throughout the day if that's something that you adhere to. And I would always love to hear from you and reconnect afterwards as well. Okay, so unpacking this title a little bit. And what we're going to be up to. I mean, I think the first thing I'd just like to say is, like, there are different kinds of keynote speakers, right? There's some that are, just the big names, super famous people. That's not what we're doing, right? And then there's others who are really the luminaries in your field, the people whose work you've been reading for years. Also not what we're doing here. So why am I here? I mean, I think I'm one of those kinds of people who are allies, who are walking this path with you, who are a little bit of an outsider, but who might be able to share some perspectives and explore the journey that we're on together in higher education. So just to set expectations, I think that's what we're up to. So lessons from the field of educational development. Clearly, this is a closely allied field. I'm so glad that people have a positive impression of the POD network and feel that it's been welcoming and friendly. Let me just see a show of hands. How many of you would consider yourselves to be educational developers? No offense if you don't, totally fine. Okay, about half, awesome. Here's our working definition of what this means. So you can kind of take that in. Focus on teaching and learning, improving how institutions do their work, but we kind of have these three prongs going, which may have terms that are more familiar. Faculty development really focuses on individuals and cohorts of instructors right now and those who are going to be instructors, so this also includes graduate students, postdoctoral scholars, sometimes even undergraduates. Instructional development focuses more on, here we go, some snow and things like that. Instructional development really focuses on changing things at the course level, at the curriculum level. I think here's where we're also in alignment with work on assessment and other kinds of things that are very familiar to all of you. And then the third prong is organizational development, where the focus is on actually changing the structures, the systems, the way leadership operates in support of goals around improving educational efforts of campuses. So given this definition, now how many of you would consider yourselves to be educational developers? We're up to like 80%. All right, excellent. So we've recruited a few of you to the field with just the definition. So let's take a look at this next piece in from the margins towards systemic change. What we're going to do over the next little bit of time is kind of trace a path through especially the last several years where we've seen a kind of increasing presence and focus on those different facets of educational development in a very central way. We'll talk about kind of what we've learned from the process and how that's moving toward this bigger idea of systemic change. And I'd like to kind of keep our trajectories in parallel throughout and just see as we go what we can learn from each other, what lessons apply across, and maybe how we might be able to combine and really work with each other to advance our causes even more. So, as Kathy mentioned, the Pod Network has been around since 1976. It's in our little tagline there. And a source that gets cited a lot in terms of the origin of the field was the book Toward Faculty Renewal by Jerry Gaff in 1975. And even then, those three prongs of individual, instructional, and organizational development were present in the field. So that goes back quite a long way. And the Pod Network just celebrated its 40th a couple of years ago, where we got a chance to reflect on that a little bit. So in 2011, Connie Schroeder and colleagues put forth this really, I think, iconic idea of coming in from the margins. And this was responding to, and I think articulating in a little bit of a more pointed way, a common perception of overemphasis on the individual faculty and the instructional development levels, and not enough focus on those organizational development, change agent kind of activities. So this was a major survey and kind of a collection of essays and work by colleagues in the field as well. This was a surprise, though, at that time, that indeed directors of centers for teaching and learning and similar kinds of organizations were actually doing this organizational development work much more than had been visible, articulated, really talked about. So it was a little bit of a surprise at that time. And then I think another bit of this story is some work that's been done by Andrea Beach, Mary Dean Sorcinelli, and colleagues with several major surveys over time, spaced about a decade apart, looking at, among many, many other things, why centers for teaching and learning and similar types of organizations doing educational development, why they were doing what they were doing, right? What were their major goals? So they asked them to put in what would they put in the top three, to kind of rank their top three, and these are the percent of respondents in 2001 and 2012 who placed different goals in their top three. So create and sustain a culture of teaching excellence, way up there, and has stayed up there, gone up a little bit. Advance new initiatives in teaching and learning. Look at the change here over a decade. That emphasis on new initiatives has grown so much over just that decade. And you all might be sensing there's been similar efforts on other campuses. There's so much about new initiatives. But look at this one. Respond to and support, and I've truncated these a little bit. I think the full phrase is respond to and support individual faculty goals for professional development. What a loss, but maybe an okay loss, right? If we look at what comes in fourth, just under the radar here, act as a change agent within the institution. So I'm going to use this cool function again. I think this is really, really interesting now that fourth one, the change agent piece, is now on par in terms of being in the top 3 with responding to and supporting individual faculty. So I think this says a lot in terms of a mindset shift in how we're approaching educational development, and recognizing that we can't necessarily run after the individual all the time. We've got to take a step back, be more systemic in our thinking, really work on the structures that will then support many, many individuals over time. So, change agent. How many of you think you're a change agent? Well, some. Do you have a card? I can get you a card. If you need to be a card-carrying change agent, just see me after. I will hook you up. Okay, and I know the sequel to this book has been mentioned many times already during the conference, but I just want to emphasize this point of connection that I think has been so eloquently stated here. Okay. So we're going to shift a little bit into a little more of the story of where this accelerating pace of coming in from the margins towards systemic change has popped up over the last many years. And I think one piece that I won't go into too much is just everything that the AACNU has done. Terry's here also, so there's many more opportunities to talk about this. But of course, the AACNU has really led the way in linking institutional and higher education sector-wide work in terms of diversity and equity, assessment, educational development, and liberal education. So more on that later. We'll focus our attention elsewhere, not because AACNU is not doing all of this work, but because these other players are really interesting to see of late, this giant patchwork. And I think it's been very striking to see the plethora of national and other organizations who are naming educational development, often just naming faculty development, but I think they kind of mean the rest of it as well. A lot of this is in STEM, in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, but I don't want anyone to feel left out. I think we can use the insights from what's coming out of STEM work in many other ways, and also I think we can recognize that, well, why has so much been happening in STEM? A lot of it is just because there's some money there at the federal level in the United States, that there was a 5-year strategic plan, not under the current administration, but under a former administration, to really focus on STEM education, that named quality in STEM education as a key driver for students being interested in and then staying with science fields, and also pointedly identified how not great a job we were doing in those areas. So there are some reasons for why this has been on the radar in those fields, but I think we can also look beyond that. One of the things that we know is, oops, something showed up that shouldn't have there, but we'll just ignore the novice expert piece for now. So there are a lot of change models. This is one that I can always remember because it's EPIC: exposure, persuasion, identification, and commitment. So that's just one model for change and adoption. But we do have some data on what this looks like in at least some of the sciences. This is pretty typical. So from 2009, this was the National Survey of Physics faculty. High percentage have some sort of exposure to another piece of jargon, what's sometimes referred to as research-based instructional practices. They like to call it that and give it that RBIS acronym in STEM fields. But only half or so, 48% here, are actually using those practices regularly. So there's a lot of drop-off or non-adoption. And I have to say those numbers haven't changed a whole lot. So we have more recent data from smaller cohorts, from different disciplines, looks pretty similar. A lot of people know kind of what they should be doing in terms of teaching. Not as many people are actually implementing it. So here we go. Along the way to this process of being exposed and then actually committing to using some more modern educational practices, it's tough. You're going from being a novice and feeling very unfamiliar and all of the struggle of organizing new information about teaching itself, and being kind of awkward and having those difficulties and a higher cognitive load with implementing it. And then I think there's other pieces in there that researchers have identified about the fit with one's academic identity, right? How does this jive with my community of practice, my academic colleagues? Does this fit within the culture that matters to me? So those kinds of things have been identified as barriers along the way. So we'll explore a little bit of this patchwork, but what's really emerging is new arguments that make sense, right, but haven't been articulated on this kind of a scale before about why educational development, about quality and student success, and even the fiscal dimension, which of course we know our institutional leaders care about a great deal. So as we take this little tour in the next little bit, I invite you to have a little I Spy game going for connections to e-portfolios, right? So you don't have to yell out when you see one, but maybe make a note of it on the side. We'll come back to that, and I'll ask you about some of that in a little bit. Sound good? All right. So the American Association of American Universities, AAU, in 2011 came out with a really interesting framework. They called it for systemic change in undergraduate STEM teaching and learning. Honestly, this could be in any teaching and learning. Really interesting to see, again, faculty professional development right there in the middle at the top under what they called scaffolding. So that individual level, certainly there, but also aspects of course and curriculum development, articulating learning outcomes, assessing and sharing evidence, and definitely that organizational development piece of engaging with leaders and aligning goals for change across the institution, setting up structures for, dare we say, evaluation and promotion that enhance and help people buy into the process of change, although maybe that term, someone said that yesterday, was not so appealing to them. Just last year, now we're moving out of STEM fields entirely, the American, I always forget what the Academy of Arts and Sciences, I'm getting all my acronyms mixed up today, came out with this major report, The Future of Undergraduate Education, the Future of America. Several big areas were identified in there, but the first priority is to strengthen the student educational experience, identifying that, the idea that we can't just tell people what to do. We can't just say, oh, look, this works, and expect them to do it. We've got to build in professional development opportunities at every level. So that's that, again, faculty development piece, the recognition that it's not just going to happen. I found it really interesting to see also last year in 2017, ACE started to put the picture together with what I think we're very familiar with. We make some interventions in instructional quality. We hope for improved instruction, whether through e-portfolios or through other methods, and maybe we have some improved learning and student success. But the rest of the loop is really important, right? If we're going to spend money to do that, where are we going to see that return come through? Well, specifically, we should be seeing that return, and we expect to see that through greater retention. We don't have to then recruit as many new students if we're helping those who we already have succeed and graduate, and that can then help with the institutional bottom line. So to see this argument be made at this kind of scale, I think is really important for all of us. And then a recent organization on the scene is the National Alliance for Broader Impact. So the National Science Foundation asks everyone proposing to do anything to justify the intellectual merit and the broader impacts. Those are the two big criteria that they're looking at. And Shirley Malcolm and others were instrumental in getting that broader impact criterion to be a part of every National Science Foundation proposal. And it includes improving STEM education and educator development at all levels. And also I put this in there because we are also talking a little bit here about the diverse, globally competitive workforce, right? All of these, and I think this has been the big change in recent years, they want to see, can you assess that, right? So maybe I spy, ding, ding, little connection there. We leverage this just at Caltech in our own work tremendously. So we just finished consulting on a new cycle of National Science Foundation career grants. These are for early career researchers, where the expectation really is for an integrated program of research and educational work. So we had about a month of consultations with people to really ask the questions, what are you trying to accomplish with your educational work at our institution? What does that look like at the undergraduate level, in the community, with younger students, with teachers? How does it all fit together, and why does it matter for your field to be doing this work? And then our disciplinary societies, again, these are some of the sciences, but we heard it mentioned yesterday, political science and history and other organizations as well are getting into the educational development space. They're bringing together cohorts of faculty, sometimes at similar stages, at the early career stage, sometimes at later points, sometimes around specific kinds of projects or curricular redesign, to really focus on evidence-based teaching practices. And again, I think e-portfolios should be listed among research-based educational practices in so many places. Okay, so how's the I Spy game going? Does everybody have at least a few? Can you hold on to them for just a little bit longer? Yeah? Okay. The next little piece, we're going to look more at the systemic change piece. So we've looked at the coming in from the margins. Educational development is now on the map. We're going to now look at what the systemic trend begins to look like. So really great work very recently, just a few years back, and I think this is still being fleshed out, around what change strategies look like on our campuses. Where's the location for change? Is it at the individual level, or is it at the environment or structural level? What is the nature of the change? Are we saying we should do this, or are we letting stakeholders kind of really figure that out and own it for themselves? So two extremes, we can plot these. We're scientists, right? Anything with two extremes is going to be a quadrant map, right? So what our colleagues, Charles Henderson, Andrea Beach, and Noah Finkelstein have done is kind of identify these different quadrants and what those mean for institutions, and map them to actual programmatic efforts in educational development. And they've applied this to a literature review of papers looking at change in STEM education, but we could look at this much more broadly as well. So this basically disseminating curriculum and pedagogy is like telling faculty what works, encouraging them to do it in some fashion. And you know, that's tough, right? People don't like to be told what to do. Just hearing it, the exposure piece does not necessarily mean it gets integrated into a level of commitment that results in action. So although there's a lot of programming that's been done in this area, it's not necessarily the most effective, certainly not on its own. Developing reflective teachers is really supporting instructors to kind of develop or make their own justification for approaches to explore and experiment and get feedback and really think about why they're doing what they're doing. Maybe develop a little bit of their own slant on it, although it's always good to not reinvent all of the wheels all of the time, but also really explore in the context. What does it mean? What do we need? So it doesn't mean starting from scratch, but definitely is a process of more deeper integration with people. And then the examples in this other set of quadrants include kind of top-down policy changes, how teaching may be evaluated, rewarding, incentives. Those can backfire, they can be helpful. It's a very mixed bag. And then quadrant 4, developing a shared vision, might be having work groups really articulate like what the institution's goals are for educational change and how they want to go about accomplishing it. So it's messy work. It's much more kind of, you don't know what you're going to get, right? People could come up with a whole different goal than what you might have gone in thinking. However, they're really going to own it. So what we're now kind of thinking about, myself and other colleagues in this area, is what does the middle look like? Again, it's kind of a trope, right? To have extremes, and then we want to find some balance in the middle. But I think we share this space in many ways of operating from, whether it's centers for teaching and learning, or assessment units, or writing programs, where we kind of have access to the top down of the institution. We're directly working with instructors in multiple ways, in ways that are emergent and really contextual and relevant for them, and connecting outcomes that we know will advance student success and learning in institutions with ones that actually matter to the people doing the work on the ground. So we can kind of think about operating this in this middle territory. And now we're seeing larger organizations and bodies of work based on this kind of understanding of systemic change emerging to actually form kind of communities who are engaged in systemic change. So the Accelerating Systemic Change Network is one of those. I think this is a great source that's just emerging for webinars and things like that. The Changemakers Toolkit, who couldn't use that along with your change agent card? Everyone should have one. Don't leave home without it. The National Academies for Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine last year launched the Roundtable on Systemic Change in Undergraduate Education. There's a lot on the slide. I'll provide these and you can take a look at it later, but really trying to look at the intersection between larger sector needs, workforce needs, our changing student populations, how the structures within our institutions are and need to change to accommodate and meet goals for improved education, and what that means for all of us who are kind of on the ground doing that work. And just a side note, they will be hosting a workshop in Washington, D.C. Coming up in September. It's free, so if you're in the area, you could go. You can also register online. I'm happy to share this with you all afterwards, too. And then finally, another big report that's just come out with this beautiful metaphoric kind of title, linking STEM education and the arts. And here is where also e-portfolios were very present in this document in a kind of a wonderful new way. Okay, so I think a few little seeds of ideas that I have seen for e-portfolios connecting with these kinds of systemic change efforts are listed here. It's great to be in the room with many of you who are cited here, who have been doing this really great work. I think these kinds of like the meta high impact practice, how we understand how it all fits together, folio thinking, the many ways in which e-portfolios can be a focal point for change with individuals, with departments, with other groups, certainly faculty engagement and development as both a central piece of advancing e-portfolios and a potential side benefit has come up in many ways. And then of course as a powerful and authentic assessment approach. So let's do the I Spy now. So I want to give you just a little bit of time to think about it. If you want to look at what you've jotted down or jot a few things down, whenever you're ready, turn to someone near you and compare notes. See if you spied the same connections across this story of coming in from the margins for educational development and systemic change emerging. What parallels stand out to you? What shared challenges have you noticed or have occurred to you maybe with your own work? And what possibilities might you have noticed? So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to compare notes and then we'll come back together. All right, so thank you for those of you who thought during that time, and also those of you who paired during that time. I'd love to hear from a few of the individuals or groups about some of the things that stood out to you, maybe some commonalities between what you've noticed in terms of connections to e-portfolios or potential connections. And Tracy has the mic. Would anyone be willing to share a little bit? Yes.
Hi, Kathleen from the University of New South Wales, Sydney, Australia. Being a scientist myself and having to work with colleagues to engage them in change making has been a challenge, to say the least. So my perspective is that people in STEM struggle with change. They know what they know and they want to teach it their way, and they can't see the connection with their own professional development. We talked about reflective practice for our students, but we're not very good at it either. So, first I want to put my hand up, but, and implementing that change making and making people more reflective so they can see where they're going has been, an issue.
Yeah. Is there anything from the knowledge of that you're bringing from the world of e-portfolios that could help with that?
Yeah, the good news is they're taking the e-portfolio on in terms of the pedagogy, not only for their own students, but for themselves in terms of reflective practice and providing those teaching portfolios.
Right.
And moving away from just doing the discipline-based research into other spaces.
Yeah. And I think this idea of the kind of concepts that are maybe on behalf of students. We're going to help our students with folio thinking. We're going to help our students with metacognition, where there can be a kind of engagement that also helps to free things up in the instructor space, in the organizational space. That can be a very powerful, but not easy, still not easy way to proceed. Thank you. Yeah. Other insights from other groups or individuals? Yes. Thank you, Tracy.
I was thinking of two other organizations. I didn't see them mentioned, but I've attended their events, so they mostly focus on science, where we've had a portfolio breakout session.
Yes.
So one is Key Engineering Unleashed. So I know that they have people doing e-portfolios.
Fantastic.
Another one is Sensor, which is, I'm trying to pull up their acronym, National Center for Science and Civic Engagement.
Yes, great. Yeah. So we can maybe amplify those pockets where e-portfolios have advanced on these goals, work to get them integrated into other efforts so that we're really reaching audiences with what is a very powerful method. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
So I wanted to go back to the ways that e-portfolios impact faculty and institutional structures. So it seems to us that we talk a lot about e-portfolios as a catalyst for students, but it seems to us that they're also a catalyst for faculty in that we're very used to thinking about our own classes, but the shared work of curriculum is harder. Right? You have to actually talk to other people in your discipline.
Yeah.
You have to get along. There has to be some kind of institutional recognition for the intellectual work of changing curriculum. And it seems to us that creates the environment for conceptual changes in faculty.
Yeah.
But at least so far, we haven't seen a lot of research that actually tries to unpack that. It feels anecdotal.
Okay.
And so I guess the challenge that we would be interested in is how can we collectively research that faculty cognitive change.
Absolutely.
And practice change. And what are the features that allow that to flourish or that get in its way? And I suspect that that's a lot of what makes the science chart that you showed stay at, I've been exposed to it, but I'm not doing anything about it.
Yes.
Because I actually can't unless I join with other people in my discipline.
Thank you so much for pointing that out. And I think that is the seed for a wonderful research agenda to pursue. There are definitely sources to draw upon in terms of how some of these other faculty change processes are being studied, but then in the context of a specific intervention with e-portfolios and how that might leverage change within the environment. I think the other piece here that we could identify together may be the sort of power of seeing that authentic evidence in how students experience their arc. That can be very compelling, I think, to our colleagues in various disciplines because they tend to care about the student experience, but not always have a window into seeing it outside of their particular environment. And then when you get into discussions with colleagues in other departments that, turf wars come up and it's like the committee on blah, 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 and everybody's there to kind of stake their turf and defend, their territory. But there can be a little bit of a loosening when we're looking through students' eyes. So I think that might be theoretically even something to identify and really understand how it fits into a change process. And I'll talk about some opportunities, maybe how we could pursue that together too.
Right. It seems like when the faculty can see what students do in a portfolio, it immediately raises the question of, well, where did we teach that? If we're frustrated that they can't do it, where in fact did we teach that?
Fantastic.
So it sends them immediately back to them.
Great. Yeah. Yes.
I was planning to share at Portland State University, we have several grants. We have an Engineer Scholars Grant. We have a NSF grant for the Build Expo program. Both of them help support underrepresented students in STEM, but primarily with social science for a decade, and now all of a sudden STEM is emerging. And something that's been really attractive to both faculty and students in terms of e-portfolio use is, one, we wrote them into the grants. So often we get these opportunities, but we don't call it out specifically. But that in the sciences, there was a reticence to participate in reflection, as you mentioned, until they realized that students really aren't interested in the lineage of practice and thought. So when they started reflecting on the mentorship of the faculty, where the faculty learned their practices and procedures, and started aligning themselves in some way with the faculty then started reflecting on their own relationships with people who mentored them and then started doing portfolios. So it kind of started a ball rolling around e-portfolio reflection that wasn't necessarily on the science itself, but on the line of thought that had gone on for decades to create the labs they were working in. And it's been successful for the faculty and the students to begin reflection on their own relationships with one another and how that's going to impact our futures.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Again, the example of what opens up when you think through a portfolio for everyone who's involved in that process. Super. So we'll go on a little bit, but we will have more of an opportunity to come back together in a little bit. I just want to share kind of a couple of big picture lessons that as a field, educational development is starting to take away from this interesting experience of kind of seeing the name pop up in all these new places over the last few years, especially. Evidence about educational development is, I think, one big area where we have had a little bit of a wake-up call, right? So, and I think about this, it's sort of been like, in from the margins toward ridiculous claims. Like, people are saying all kinds of things, and it's a little bit, to me, that educational development has suddenly been discovered, and there's a tendency to kind of stake these claims. It feels a little bit like the gold rush to me. Like, there's educational development in them there hills, and so there's a little bit of just kind of this tendency to either overstate or undersell and say, like, well, educational development is really important, but who knows if it works? Actually, there's been good evidence as a field. I think we've been recognizing, like, we need to spell this out in a much clearer way for our colleagues in higher education. So we're just at the very beginning. I know our colleagues at AAC and U and AAEEBL and NALOA have been doing this for quite some time. But we really are trying to boil down the point in a series of papers that are short, they're pithy, they're evidence-based. They're the kind of thing that, maybe a president or a provost or a vice provost or would actually read it because it's just a couple pages long. And in this one that we put together in the fall, we really just tried to pinpoint what is the evidence, and that it's there and that it's good evidence for the whole causal chain, right? The impact of educational development on instructional practice, the impact of that on student outcomes. But also the second part of this paper makes the case to not expect every educational development effort to track that whole series of that whole causal chain. That's a lot of work. That's a very in-depth research project. And if you want change to happen on your campus, dear higher education upper administration, you maybe just want the change to happen. Maybe you don't want to fund the entire effort to study every piece of that in a rigorous way, right? So let's rely on the evidence that we have. Let's do what we know works. Let's study intensive places where we really feel we can learn and where we have those resources. But overall, let's look at the evidence that really matters in the context. So I think the other big lesson is just that, wow, we've got a lot of new collaborators, and the need really is there to make the decision. Are we going to say, like, welcome aboard, or are we going to let people build their own ships and sail to wherever they might want to go? Sorry for the mixed metaphors, but maybe like reinvent a lot of wheels along the way. So that's happened a little bit, I think, in some areas, particularly around the department, the academic department as the unit for change. There's been, I think, some ships that have sailed, identifying the department as the only important locus for change, which is, it's one place, and it's a place where educational development can be very powerful, but it's not the only place. And in fact, when we systematically connect those efforts, we have the power to move even further. So a couple of years ago, the Pod Network, recognizing this kind of new set of collaborators on the field, worked with the network of STEM education centers to really come together and figure out, how do we collaborate? How do we work together? STEM education centers really took off in the 2000s. There were a few around before that, mostly focused on STEM teacher education. And then in the 2000s, they started to really move into the space of improving undergraduate education in the sciences for everyone, for future teachers and others. So this convening brought together centers for teaching and learning, STEM education centers, to really understand, how do we collaborate? And I think we spent a lot of time on this, just figuring out and mapping what our different strengths were, right? What do we bring to the table? How do we draw on each other's expertise? How do we acknowledge that, be explicit about it, and also go to our colleagues when we could use their expertise as well? So the report, which is available online, really goes into some depth in what those key areas are. You can see some of them here: productive outsider, right? Useful insider in a particular discipline, different expertise in terms of assessment and evaluation, different connections across the campus, different roles, different expertise in terms of the ability to engage groups of people, the networks that people have on campus and with external funders and stakeholders and internal populations as well, access to different bodies of literature and research to inform our practice and what we do. Another key insight came out about just the structure of the different networks that are us and our new players, new collaborators might have access to, and we found it really productive to think about actually, articulating and mapping, who are we connected to? How can we leverage those connections? If we look at the kind of change that we want to impact on a campus, who needs to be involved in that? And can we collaborate to reach all of those parties together and connect them? And then Lisa Donaldson just yesterday had this great metaphor in a session about the connective tissue, e-portfolios as a kind of connective tissue. I really like that metaphor. I think it's a different take on mapping and thinking about a network and thinking about how important those connections are. And as a longtime yoga practitioner, I also just love that idea of the connective tissue that bridges all of the work that we do. And then I won't go into this because Janina spent such a great amount of time in working with us on assessment yesterday, but we also spent some time really thinking about our different strengths in terms of assessment practices. So at this workshop, which was about a day and a half, so we went into some depth, we also worked on actually producing a guide to collaborating. And a metaphor that came up, which might resonate, is it's kind of dangerous work. Someone brought up this image of the people who paint big bridges, not to mention building them, right? But then you have to keep them looking nice and keep them protected from the elements. So it's kind of dangerous work to be working on these bridges, or it can feel that way at times. And so working on a guide to collaborating, we thought about, well, how do we make it a little safer? How do we make it a little easier? How do we lower the threshold to really working across different units and parts of our campuses? And the first principle here is really the explicit foundation of collaboration. We might think, you might think, I might think that we're operating on a collective impact model, but we might not actually be on the same page as others in the organization. So just having a framework, a groundwork, like, okay, let's pursue this with a particular model in mind can be helpful. Sharing information in conjunction with the open invitation to participate, it sounds maybe pretty basic. How many of you have ever had someone come to you and say, like, oh, there's this hot new thing happening on campus, and your heart sinks because, like, that's what you've been doing for 10, 20 years. Anybody else? Yeah. So we work and look, we live in siloed environments, in complex environments. This can happen. It can happen unintentionally at times. So the awareness around sharing what we're doing, but with the invitation, and not making the assumption that other people are not also working on this. So we thought about that as just a principle. Not everyone might do it, but if we can start to model that kind of a sharing with the invitation, with the opening to connect and work together, that might help. We also thought about the importance of just multiple ways to get people together. This is a sort of water cooler effect, but we've got to build it in intentionally when we're not co-located, when we are so siloed and our environments are complex. And then finally, just starting these collaborations around very small points to build momentum, build success, and make it a positive experience to start to work together. So this is like not biting off too much until we get the kinks worked out about actually how our collaborations might function. So, and then I'll just let you take a look at this final quote, which was from the report. And I think that might resonate, this productively messy kind of space that we operate in. Okay, so I want to give you another just couple of minutes to kind of think about, as these stories have proceeded and you've engaged with some of our lessons around evidence and around collaborations, what comes up for you? Are there places on campus that you've wanted to collaborate with? How might you start to approach those? And are there other lessons for the field of e-portfolios that we might think about together? So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to partner up on that, and then we'll hear some insights. All right, if I can call you back together and think about whether your group would like to share a kind of insight that you've had in this area. So again, as educational development has always had this kind of change agent, systemic change piece, but it's come to light and we're learning these bigger lessons. What are some of the lessons for you? What are some of your takeaways here? Do we have one? Yeah? No? Thanks, Tracy. Woohoo!
One thing we were discussing is how person-to-person interaction can often be seen like it has to overcome a level of personal protection that people seem to really feel attached to and protective of their solution as the solution.
Right.
And saying to somebody in the political science, hey, School of Social Work is doing some really cool work. Well, why don't we take a look at that? The political science person gets super defensive and says, no, that's different from what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Praise and innovation doesn't have to be zero-sum, and getting over that hump with people when you're in the beginning phases of these relationships seems really difficult unless there's some culture of whether that's sort of centralized office, does case studies or celebrates the work that's being done at different places, for a culture of open and active sharing from the beginning, getting over that defensiveness, effectiveness of my solution seems really difficult.
Yeah, and so sometimes working on, you might have this idea that you want to really go after, I don't know, student learning outcomes or e-portfolios or something really big down the road, but sometimes starting with something a little less defended off to the side where maybe no one's really done anything, or it's just a kind of a topic of shared interest, where there is nothing at stake, that can kind of start to help build those connections in a safe way so that eventually we can take on the more challenging, more defended kinds of topics. I don't know if that helps, but that's something that we've been thinking about too. Yes?
And we were really enjoying your comments and laughing a bit because we had the exact same conversation down here. We labeled it ego, and the fact that we work in institutions where there's, everyone's an expert. So we have that additional hurdle when we look at collaboration. And I think that collaboration is a skill that we sometimes assume people know how to do it. And if we can back that training up a bit and then start explaining what is collaboration, how do you do that, how does that exchange work so it's not just me telling you what to do.
Yep. I mean, just like in classes, having some ground rules, setting up a framework can be very helpful. It's also a little bit harder to do sometimes with our experts. But, when it's a different place, sometimes you have a little bit of leeway. This is also where, quite frankly, we use outsiders very purposefully from beyond the institution. I think when you bring someone in, sometimes people are like on their best behavior with someone from somewhere else that they kind of want to impress. So that can start to loosen things up a little bit, even though that same expertise exists on campus and, yeah. Yes?
Following on from both comments, the other thing is that people don't really always have to start from scratch. So if you look at e-portfolios for faculty development, why not talk to the people already doing e-portfolios with the students and to learn from their experiences so that, we don't just start from zero again, but really start already in the middle and don't make all the same mistakes.
Absolutely. So sometimes the tricky part is figuring out how to draw upon that expertise in a way that doesn't run up against these kind of defense mechanisms. So maybe there is a central office, maybe there is some third party, whether it's in student affairs or in academic affairs, who can call people together from a more neutral point of view, like without an agenda. Maybe depends on your players on campus and what their personalities are, of course. But sometimes that separate convening so that we get to hear what's going on with e-portfolios already and maybe some other initiatives on campus that might connect in a forum could be helpful. Yeah. So I know we're headed into that open discussion time. I'm just gonna, since we've already been having a little discussion, I'm gonna share just a little bit of resources and things that might be helpful, and then we'll go into kind of a synthesis and final wrap up. Does that sound all right? Okay. So I know I'm here from the Pod Network. We've been mentioning some things. I have some flyers down there. This is the obligatory little plug. We have a conference coming up. It's not too far from here in Portland, Oregon. Jose Bowen will be our keynote speaker there. We also have some events around the AAC Conference, which will be in Atlanta in January. So I know you'll also have an e-portfolio presence there, so we might get to see each other again at that occasion. If there's any interest in kind of doing a deeper dive into the field of faculty, the faculty part of educational development in particular, we do have a summer institute that will be at Greensboro next summer, and there'll be more information available coming soon. And then just a preview. So we're working on our next strategic plan for the Pod Network, and it was wonderful to sit in on the AAEEBL meeting yesterday and kind of hear the ways in which, as a community, you're working to advance your initiatives and next steps for the field. I just wanted to share this preview because it's it's really new for us to name organizational capacity as a strategic kind of a big piece of a strategic plan, and we've really recognized that we need to make that very explicit. We need to name and make that work visible, so that we see that we need to put energy and effort into building the kind of organizational capacity, the infrastructure, to be able to accomplish all of the other goals. Because I know we can't just do all this extra stuff without the infrastructure to be able to sustain it. So now let's just go into, we can do a couple different things with the next pieces, and I really want to respond to where you want to go with this. We could spend a little bit of time over on the left here articulating really what is your unique expertise in the field of e-portfolios, so that might be something that you can really leverage going forward and put on the table when you're working on these collaborations and larger efforts. So that's something we could do a little bit of, and we can also just do some open discussion and synthesis of where we've been and where we're going. So with that, let me be quiet and see where you want to head with this.
So I think we have a question or comment out here.
Perfect.
Hi, I'm Louise Klein from Catholic College in the UK. So we've got a slightly different setup, I know, in our education systems, but we have just completed what we're calling supported experiments, where we work within faculties to look at projects where teams have collaborated and then brought all that together in a teaching and learning affair. And what it did take was the people as a tissue, my colleague Lisa just talked about, that was critical. I have a role as an advanced learning practitioner, and we work across the campuses and bring people together and create those teams. So the teams identify what it is they're developing, and then we talk them through reflective cycles, we give them directions to go in, but it's their ideas and we just help them form, and then they were really keen to share that across with other colleagues at the end of a year of that supported experiment. What I did do was a pilot a couple of years ago where we did this similar thing, which produced the idea of the broader supported experiment with faculties that use e-portfolios with their students. And they recognised the value, the strength of that. What we now need to do is really build to combine so that all of those experiments get into portfolios, so that's the next step.
Oh, fantastic. So some things that I love about this, you've really named the facilitator role, right? Who is going to do that work of connecting the pieces, right? Who is going to actually build the connective tissue and embed it within what's happening, across different areas of campus? And I think I've seen this sort of identification of the facilitator role happen. In this case, it's across the institution around a particular kind of use or intervention, e-portfolios. I've also been seeing that emerge in some colleagues are doing what's called departmental action teams. So within a particular discipline, that we're kind of bringing someone in with that same skill set to essentially build the connective pieces within a particular academic discipline, so that they get on the same page and are able to share what they're doing in terms of their educational practice more effectively. And then I think the third piece here is, how do we make it visible, right? How do we make that interesting and appealing and kind of get it out to others in the university, keeping in mind that just telling people isn't necessarily enough. There's got to be this deeper engagement, right? Thank you.
Any questions or comments?
I think the visibility piece is so important. We work on campuses often, and they have these fantastic student portfolios, and they're doing really interesting work, and I'm like, where can you find those? Nowhere, right? They're not on our website, there's not a showcase. And then the contrast is campuses that do that really well, and I think that speaks to the issue that you raised earlier about faculty members in particular disciplines and the whole issue of ego. Sometimes that sort of inspires a little healthy competition too, right? If you sort of see, oh, political science is doing that, maybe in history we better get our act together, or whatever it might be. Sometimes it can really inspire some interesting conversations, because when we say portfolios or e-portfolios, that might even mean multiple things to multiple stakeholders on our campus, and so helping people to see what examples look like and how we're all defining that would be really, is really important.
Yeah, fantastic.
to add to that, there's a saying that one of our assistant superintendents in the school district that I'm from said, you know, if we share our knowledge, we reclaim our profession. And I think that speaks to kind of what you were pointing out, and also you, because I think that there's pieces that there are places that these conversations are happening. There are renewed efforts around curriculum mapping happening on campus, and there are institutions that are trying to map IMPACT practices, right? And I'm not sure that portfolios have made it into that discussion as much as it could, but the more that you can share how much students are learning from these experiences, the more they become visible and the more that you become a part of that conversation. So I think there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, it's almost like those two levels, right? So you need that 30,000 feet above the ground kind of view that is mapping what are the various practices that we're engaging in on our campuses, and then that lower level sort of view where people are on the ground saying, well, I'm using portfolios, or I've got a field school, or so we can start sharing the language around the work that we're doing, because they all are very connected. I mean, I love that idea of connective tissue, and maybe it's the conversations that, you know, just get us all talking to each other that are valuable.
Yeah, and that in itself is a portfolio approach, right? What is the portfolio of strategies the institution is using and our colleagues are using to pursue similar kinds of goals? Yeah.
So we're using the word conversation a lot, and I just want to say that one of the most successful things that we've done is to try to promote conversation intentionally, but in a low stakes, low investment way. Faculty are really busy, and they have all kinds of demands on their time. But coming together for a lunch conversation, they're going to eat lunch anyway, that's not hard, and we can help facilitate that. And so our lunch discussion series have been really very popular and very successful, and faculty keep coming back because they tell us that they have few opportunities to talk to people across campus. So that led to then a kind of fair, we call it Conversations in Celebrating Teaching, and it's basically a kind of poster session, but again, low stakes. So we invite faculty to share what they've been doing, but not necessarily treat it as a research project.
Okay.
Just share. Even if it's not working, you can create the poster that says what you've done so far and what the challenge is. And we do that once a year, and again, it's pretty low stakes, but it generates a kind of conversational enthusiasm.
Yeah. And, you know, I think something to build on that is how you trace what change emerges from that. And so that's like another piece of, you know, evaluating impact that from that you might be able to find out that 5 people got an idea that they then implemented. So you can start to track. No, again, it's work, so not every, you know, you might not want to go this route, or but others might have that idea about another program that they have. And again, I think the different scales of conversation are important as well. The smaller conversations with close colleagues, that is just the very informal lunch or whatever it may be, that's an important component. The more visible, kind of bigger conversations where colleagues actually see each other and are feel part of a larger community, are also helpful approaches. Yeah. Yes.
Thanks. One of the things we've worked a lot on in BC is indigenizing our curriculum, both K-12 and post-secondary. And it makes me think about one of the First Peoples principles, which is that you put the learning of your colleagues before your own learning. And so it really is a shift in mindset to think about, what do I know and what responsibility do I have to share that with other people, knowing that it might be messy or not perfect or not complete. But I think it's worth thinking about other worldviews in this conversation to make it more about benefiting the community.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And that may be an antidote to the kind of defended ego that we've been talking about as well, right? And again, like framing conversations with some new principles at play can be a very helpful approach. Thank you. Oh, Tracy.
And just to note on the educational terrain, so something that I noticed when we're working with our partner institutions is this intergenerational component, and I'm thinking this because Dr. Baker brought it up, The idea of intellectual property definitely predates the digital age, right? The knowledge age. And so you're working with faculty who were taught that if you own an idea, it belongs to you, it's part of your succession and moving forward. And then you have this dandelion proliferation model coming up, where people just want to share everything because from the moment they could get on a computer and have an idea, it was to be shared with everyone, like you're saying, the good of your colleagues. So there's this tension happening all the time between like intellectual property and intergenerational communication in the faculty system, and I think those things really have to be honored, but they have to be recognized first. Systemic veins of thought that are deeply entrenched, right? Let everything go to the wind, and everyone owns everything, versus I have to own this as a part of my process and my identity.
Yeah. Well, and being explicit about that, so making the shift, and this is something that we do a little bit with the new faculty nationally in physics and astronomy at the beginning of a 3-day institute. We really kind of try to make that mindset shift from, your research, your individual kind of pursuit and the criteria that you will be measured on there in terms of the individual citations and references and the grant funding, to this other thing, this educational thing, where we're really in it together. Like our students are shared, and they will not just see you as an individual, they're going to see all of your colleagues as well. And so you get to draw from that community as well. Like, come be part of what we collectively know and understand about student learning, and feel free to implement and experiment and not have to bear the whole of that burden alone. Yeah.
I think one thing I would add is looking at educational development without having a conversation around hiring and promotions and tenure and the role that this plays within that context. I think you're right, that generationally that's something that will have to be addressed, and as younger faculty come on board and are rewarded for those behaviors, I think that will serve as a motivation for those who were rewarded for individualism and independence.
Yeah. It's a tricky area, to be sure. Certainly, again, some of our national organizations are bravely taking it on, and having the conversations with presidents and with provosts about how we reward teaching as part of the whole package. Frankly, we're just not there yet. I think there's still a lot of confusion about what is appropriate recognition, what are the appropriate kinds of evidence to look at. Certainly, it's emerging that we cannot rely on any single indicator or measure. Everything is basically problematic in one way or another, but an understanding of how we put the picture together is still very, very much emergent. I hope we get there, I really do. So I know we have a time cap, and
we have time for maybe one more question.
Oh, okay. Well, I can also just say I'm very excited. I'm excited about the many ideas that have come up here. I'm excited about the possibility of really studying the role that e-portfolios can play as a catalyst in some new ways. The Pod Network does have some scholarship grants available, so if that's something that you all want to look at with us, I can be happy to share that information. I also just want to point out that our discussion group, it's a Google group, is open to anyone, so no membership required. We have about 1,300 members, but I think there's 5,000 to 10,000 on the list on the Google group or something on that scale. So it's a very active list. You can always do it in digest form, but people are very open to asking and answering questions. There have been many really excellent research projects that have started with just an inquiry. I'm interested in studying X. Who's doing this? Can we work together? So I invite you. I really look forward to keeping in touch, and I thank you for your kind attention and participation on this early Wednesday morning.
And just on behalf of AAEEBL, thank you very much, Cassandra, for helping us think about systematic change, about ways of collaborating, and about how to conduct messy work. Please join me again in thanking Cassandra.